Friends, welcome. This is Richard Wolff. Today we are going to talk about something that is fundamentally shifting the tectonic plates of the North American economy and, by extension, the global capitalist order. We are looking at a moment that history books, if they are written honestly, which is always a struggle in our system, will record as a turning point. It is the moment the United States, the declining hegemon, the fading empire, reached out its hand to squeeze its polite northern neighbor, expecting the usual submission, the usual compliance, and found instead a brick wall. We are talking about the confrontation between Donald Trump's White House and Mark Carney's Canada. But I want to be very clear with you right from the start. If you think this is a story about two men, if you think this is about a personality clash between a brash American billionaire and a cool-headed Canadian central banker, you are missing the point. You are missing the systemic reality. This is not about personalities. This is about the structural crisis of American capitalism. It is about an empire that has run out of economic carrots and is now left only with sticks, and it is discovering to its horror that the sticks no longer work. For 70 years since the end of the Second World War, the relationship between the United States and Canada has been presented to you, the public, as a partnership. They call it a friendship. They use words like allies and neighbors. But let us look at the economic reality. In a capitalist system where profit is the only God and accumulation is the only prayer, there are no friends. There are competitors and there are subordinates. For 70 years, the Canadian economy has functioned largely as a resource colony for American industry. They provide the wood, the oil, the minerals, the water, and the hydropower. We, the United States, provide the protection and the market. It was a deal based on American dominance. When the elephant rolled over, as the old saying goes, the mouse moved. The mouse had to move, but yesterday the mouse didn't move. Yesterday the elephant rolled over and the mouse stood its ground, and now the elephant is confused. The elephant is panicking because an empire that cannot command obedience from its closest, most integrated neighbor is an empire that is naked before the world. Let's look at the specifics of what happened because the details matter. They reveal the desperation in Washington. The Trump administration sent a memorandum of understanding to Ottawa. Now, in the diplomatic language of capitalism, a memorandum is usually a polite suggestion. This was not that. This was an ultimatum. This was a ransom note. The demands were staggering. They wanted a rewrite of the energy clauses in the USMCA, the trade agreement that was supposed to be settled. They wanted unrestricted access to Canadian hydropower and oil at below market rates. Let's pause on that. Below market rates. In a capitalist system that claims to worship the free market, the leader of the free world is demanding goods at prices fixed by political power, not by supply and demand. Do you see the contradiction? Do you see the hypocrisy? When they want to charge you high prices for medicine, it's the free market. When they want Canadian oil, suddenly the market is inconvenient and they want state-mandated discounts. This is not capitalism. This is feudalism with better PR. They demanded Canada abandon its digital services tax. Why? Because American tech monopolies, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, do not want to pay taxes anywhere. They extract value from every corner of the globe and hoard it in tax havens, and the American government acts as their enforcer. And finally, they demanded Canada align its foreign policy on China 100% with Washington. They are effectively telling a sovereign nation, you do not have a foreign policy, we have a foreign policy, and you will copy-paste it. The threat attached to this was a universal 25% tariff, a tax on everything, a siege. Now, traditionally, the Canadian ruling class, and let's be honest, Mark Carney represents the Canadian ruling class, the bankers, the financiers, the established elite, would panic. They would look at their spreadsheets, see the cost of a trade war, and they would fold. They would fly to Washington, offer some concessions, maybe sacrifice the dairy farmers or the lumber industry, and sign the deal. That is how the script is written. That is how the American empire maintains its standard of living, by extracting concessions from weaker partners. But Mark Carney did not follow the script. He held a press conference. He did not yell. He did not scream. He simply said, no. He said that Canada's resources belong to Canadians. And then he threatened to trigger Clause 14. Now, you have to understand why this is sending shockwaves through Wall Street and the White House. This is not just a refusal. This is a revelation of leverage. For decades, Americans have been told a story of energy independence. Trump loves to say it. Drill, baby, drill. We are energy dominant. It is a good slogan. It plays well at rallies. It makes people feel strong. But it is a lie. The American Northeast, New York, Boston, the centers of American finance and culture, keeps its lights on because of Canadian hydropower. We are addicted to their energy. We are dependent. When Carney refused to sign, and when electricity futures in the Northeast spiked 14% in 2 hours, the market was stripping away the political lies and revealing the material reality. The material reality is that the United States needs Canada just as much, if not more, than Canada needs the United States in this specific sector. What we are witnessing is the limits of bullying. You see, bullying works when you have overwhelming power and the other side has no options. But the world has changed. The United States is no longer the only game in town. Europe is there. China is there. The global south is rising. Canada has options. Carney was on the phone with Europe. He was talking to Mexico. He understands that in a multipolar world, the United States cannot simply dictate terms like it did in 1950 or 1980. The American empire is like a landlord who hasn't fixed the plumbing in 30 years, but still tries to raise the rent by screaming at the tenants. The tenants are realizing they can move, or worse, they are realizing they own the building. This brings us to the deeper economic critique. Why is the United States doing this? Why is Trump acting this way? Is it just because he is a bully? No, that is too simple. A Marxist analysis looks for the systemic cause. The United States is in a crisis of profitability. Its industries are hollowed out. Its infrastructure is crumbling. Its dominance is fading. When a capitalist power can no longer compete fairly, when it can no longer produce better goods at cheaper prices, it turns to force. It turns to mercantilism. It turns to tariffs and threats. Trump's tariffs are not a sign of strength. They are a sign of weakness. They are an admission that American industry cannot survive without the state putting a gun to the head of its competitors. They are trying to use political and military weight to extract economic value that they can no longer generate through production. This is the classic behavior of a declining empire. It becomes predatory. It starts eating its allies. We saw this with the British Empire in its final days. We are seeing it now with the American one. And Canada, being the closest ally, is the first to feel the teeth. But Canada is not a third world nation that can be easily toppled by a CIA coup, though I'm sure some in Washington are fantasizing about that. Canada is a G7 economy. It is integrated into the global financial system. Mark Carney is a man who ran the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada. He is not a radical. He is not a socialist. He is a high priest of capitalism, and that is what makes his refusal so dangerous for Trump. If a man like Carney, a man who believes in the system, who believes in markets, says enough, it means the American demands have become so irrational, so extractive, that even the fellow capitalists are revolting. Let's talk about that Clause 14. The mainstream media will gloss over this technicality, but we need to dig into it. In trade agreements, there are usually nuclear options, clauses that allow a country to suspend benefits or take drastic action in the face of national security threats or fundamental breaches. By threatening to trigger this, Canada is effectively saying, if you want a trade war, we will not just put tariffs on your bourbon or your Harley Davidsons. We will target the structural vulnerabilities of your economy. They are looking at the energy grid. They are looking at the supply chains for raw materials that the U.S. military-industrial complex needs. This is economic warfare, plain and simple. And the United States is not ready for it. The American public is certainly not ready for it. We have been lulled into a sense of security, believing that cheap goods and cheap energy are our birthright, guaranteed by our military. We are about to find out that those things are negotiated, and the negotiation is going badly. The panic in the White House, the deafening silence mentioned in the reports, is the realization that they bluffed and got called. Trump is used to dealing with people who are afraid of him. He is used to the real estate world where you can sue people into submission. He is used to the political world where insults destroy careers, but you cannot insult a hydroelectric dam into producing power for you. You cannot sue a supply chain into existence. The material economy, the world of things, of energy, of atoms, does not care about your tweets. It does not care about your political brand. It cares about logistics, physics, and contracts. And in that world, Canada holds cards that Trump forgot they had. This situation exposes the fragility of the just-in-time global economy. We have built a system where efficiency is prized over resilience. We don't store extra energy. We don't have backup stockpiles. We rely on the constant, smooth flow of goods across borders. When you threaten to slap a 25% tariff on everything crossing the northern border, you are throwing a wrench into a machine that is spinning at 10,000 RPM. The chaos that would ensue, automotive plants in Michigan shutting down because they can't get parts from Ontario, grocery stores in New York empty of fresh produce, energy prices skyrocketing, would be catastrophic. It would trigger a recession, perhaps a depression. And for what? To satisfy the ego of an administration that refuses to accept the changing world, to squeeze a few extra percentage points of profit for American corporations. We must also look at the labor aspect of this. Who pays the price for this trade war? It won't be Donald Trump. It won't be Mark Carney. They are wealthy men. They will be fine. The price will be paid by the working class, the American auto worker who gets laid off because the supply chain breaks, the Canadian lumberjack who loses his job because of tariffs, the single mother in Boston whose electricity bill doubles in the middle of winter. This is the tragedy of our system. The elites play their games of geopolitical poker, bluffing with the livelihoods of millions of people. They treat nations as pieces on a board game, and us, the workers, as the collateral damage. Carney's refusal is significant because it breaks the psychological hold of American exceptionalism. For a long time, Canadian leaders and leaders around the world operated under the assumption that they had to keep the Americans happy at all costs. The cost of displeasing the emperor was too high, But what Carney has calculated is that the cost of pleasing the emperor has now become higher than the cost of fighting him. The demands have become so extreme, so humiliating, that submission is no longer a viable political or economic strategy. This is a shift in the calculus of power. It means that the United States has overplayed its hand. It has extracted too much, pushed too hard, and now the pushback is beginning. And notice the silence from the so-called opposition in the United States. The Democrats, the centrists, are they standing up and saying this is madness? No, because deep down they share the same imperial assumptions. They might be more polite about it. They might use better grammar than Trump, but they also believe that the world owes the United States a living. They also believe in American primacy. They are paralyzed because they don't have an alternative vision. They don't know how to relate to the world as equals. They only know how to relate as masters. And when the master narrative fails, they have nothing to say. So here we are. The elephant has rolled over, the mouse has stood up, and the entire North American continent is holding its breath. In the next parts of this analysis, we are going to go deeper. We are going to look at the specific industries at risk. We are going to look at the reaction from Europe and China, who are watching this with glee, seeing the American alliance system fracture. We are going to examine the internal politics of Canada, where Carney is taking a gamble that could make him a national hero or destroy the economy. But most importantly, we are going to keep our eyes on the system. We are going to keep asking who benefits, who pays, and why does this economic system produce conflict after conflict, crisis after crisis, instead of the peace and prosperity it promises? What we are watching is history being made, but it is the history of a system in decline. It is the flailing of a giant that has lost its balance. And as we proceed, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Economic power is not just about money. It is about control over the real resources that sustain life. Canada has the resources. The United States has the demand. In a rational system, these two would cooperate for the benefit of all. In a capitalist system, they are locked in a struggle for dominance. And that struggle is about to get very, very ugly. Stay with me because we are just scratching the surface of what this new reality means for you, for your job, and for the future of the global economy. This is Richard Wolff, and this is part one of our deep dive into the North American rupture. The confrontation between Donald Trump's America and Mark Carney's Canada is not a diplomatic spat. It is a symptom of a dying empire lashing out at its own limbs. We talked about the elephant rolling over and the mouse refusing to move. Now we must go deeper. We must look at the machinery of this conflict, the nuts and bolts of the economic disaster that is unfolding. And most importantly, we must ask the question that every honest economist must ask: where does this end? We promised to look at the specific industries, and there is no better place to start than the automotive sector. You see, when politicians like Trump talk about American cars or Canadian cars, they are engaging in a fantasy. There is no such thing. In the real world of modern capitalist production, a car is not made in one place. It is assembled from parts that cross the border, sometimes 6 or 7 times before the final vehicle rolls off the line. The engine block might be cast in Ohio, machined in Ontario, sent to Michigan for assembly, and then installed in a chassis that came from Mexico. The border between Detroit and Windsor is not a wall. It is a conveyor belt. It is the jugular vein of the North American industrial organism. When Trump threatens a 25% tariff, he is not taxing foreigners. He is taxing American companies. He is taxing Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. He is pouring sand into the gears of his own national industry. This is the profound contradiction of the nationalist capitalist. He wants to protect his nation's industry, but his nation's industry is thoroughly globalized. If that border thickens, if trucks are stopped, if tariffs are applied, the factories in Michigan do not just get more expensive, they stop, they shut down. And when they shut down, it is the American worker who is sent home without pay. It is the community in the Rust Belt, already devastated by 40 years of neoliberalism, that takes another body blow. Trump thinks he is punishing Canada. In reality, he is signing the execution warrant for the very manufacturing base he claims to love. This is the irrationality of the system on full display. Now let us turn our eyes to the geopolitical stage. The rest of the world is not ignoring this. They are watching with a mixture of horror and opportunity. In Europe, the leaders in Brussels and Berlin are seeing the confirmation of their worst fears. The United States is no longer a reliable partner. It is a rogue state. If Washington can try to strangle Canada, its closest ally, its cultural cousin, its neighbor, what will it do to Germany? What will it do to France? The European Union is already on the phone with Mark Carney. They are discussing new trade corridors that bypass the United States entirely. They are realizing that they must immunize themselves against the American infection. And then there is China. Do not think for a second that Beijing is not smiling at this spectacle. The American empire has spent the last decade trying to build a coalition to contain China. They have pressured allies to ban Chinese technology, to sanction Chinese goods. And now the United States is doing China's work for it. By alienating Canada, by bullying its neighbors, Washington is fracturing the very alliance system that gives it global power. China does not need to defeat the United States militarily. It just needs to wait for the United States to defeat itself economically. Every tariff Trump threatens is an advertisement for the Belt and Road Initiative. Every insult thrown at Ottawa is a diplomatic gift to Beijing. The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife. In trying to make America great again through isolationism, they are ensuring America becomes isolated, but certainly not great. But we must return to the class analysis, because that is where the truth lives. I want you to look closely at Mark Carney. The media portrays him as the hero of this story, the adult in the room, and in a relative sense, perhaps he is. But let us not be naive. Carney is not fighting for you. He is not fighting for the Canadian working class. He is fighting for the Canadian banking sector, for the resource extraction corporations, for the stability of Canadian capital. His refusal of Trump's demands is a calculated risk to protect the profits of the Canadian bourgeoisie. If the Canadian economy crashes because of this trade war, do you think Carney will lose his home? Do you think the board members of the Royal Bank of Canada will go hungry? No, the austerity will be passed down. The tightening of belts will be demanded of the teachers, the nurses, the construction workers. This is the trap we are in. We are asked to pick a side between a brash nationalist bully and a suave globalist technocrat. Trump represents a chaotic, predatory capitalism that wants to loot the world to save itself. Carney represents a managed neoliberal capitalism that wants to maintain the status quo of exploitation through polite agreements. Neither of these paths offers liberation for the working class. One offers chaos, the other offers managed decline. The tragedy is that we are spectators in a coliseum, cheering for one gladiator or the other, while both of them are fighting to decide who gets to own the arena that we are forced to build. So, How does this end? The immediate crisis might de-escalate. Perhaps the pressure from Wall Street, who are terrified of losing their Canadian assets, will force Trump to back down. Perhaps a deal will be struck where Canada gives up a little less and Trump claims a victory he didn't earn. That is the likely short-term outcome. The system will patch itself up. The stock market will rally. The pundits will say the system worked. But do not be fooled. The structural fracture remains. The trust is gone. The precedent has been set. The world now knows that the United States is willing to weaponize its economic gravity against its friends. Canada now knows that it must pivot away from the U.S., accelerating the fragmentation of the North American bloc. The underlying economic crisis, the decline of American profitability, the desperation of its ruling class has not been solved. It will erupt again, perhaps next time with Mexico, perhaps with Europe, perhaps again with Canada. We are living through the end of the American century. It is not ending with a bang, but with a series of frantic, self-destructive tantrums. The Carney moment is just one chapter in this long saga of decline. It is a signal that the old order is crumbling. The elephant can no longer command the room just by being big. The smaller animals are realizing they have teeth, too. For us, the people who work for a living, the lesson is clear. We cannot rely on these leaders to save us. We cannot rely on the good capitalist to save us from the bad capitalist. We need to build our own power. We need to understand that this system, which pits nation against nation in a race to the bottom, is obsolete. We have the technology, the resources, and the labor to provide a decent life for everyone on this continent, from the Yukon to the Yucatan. But we cannot do it as long as we are organized around profit. We cannot do it as long as our energy grids, our factories, and our borders are weapons in the hands of the elite. The fight between Trump and Carney is a fight over who gets to be the captain of the Titanic. It is an entertaining distraction, but the ship is still sinking. It is time we started building a new ship. It is time we started talking about a system where economic decisions are made democratically by the people who do the work, not by billionaires in towers playing poker with our lives. That is the only way out of this cycle of crisis. That is the only way we stop being the collateral damage in their wars. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive. The situation is volatile, the future is uncertain, but the analysis remains the same. Capitalism is the problem, and we are the solution. This is Richard Wolff. Stay safe, stay critical, and let's get to work.